She abandoned her husband and 2 babies, saying she didn't need them. Years later, she returned and didn't recognize her own daughters. Subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching this video from. The late afternoon sun poured its golden light through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting a warm hue on the beige walls and wooden floor. In the modest living room, the soft cooing of 2 infant girls echoed gently, blending with the rhythm of the ceiling fan. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor, 1 baby in each arm, gently rocking them to sleep. Their tiny hands rested against his chest, and their breaths were warm and rhythmic. He hummed a lullaby, one his own mother used to sing to him, his voice low and comforting. The smell of baby lotion, powdered formula, and laundry soap clung to the air like a soft blanket, giving the home a sense of quiet security. But in the kitchen, tension simmered. Emma, his wife, paced between the sink and the counter, her movements sharp and impatient. The clinking of glass jars and the abrupt rustle of drawers betrayed her agitation. She had stopped singing to the babies weeks ago, no longer kissed them good night, and rarely met Daniel's eyes. Her silences grew louder with each passing day, her smiles more rare, and her presence more like a guest than a mother. Daniel had noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed how she no longer laughed at his jokes, how she winced at the chipped mugs they drank from, how she scrolled endlessly through her phone, pausing longer on pictures of exotic vacations and luxury living. He noticed, too, how she now wore makeup even to the grocery store, as though preparing to be seen by someone else. Still, he held on to hope. Maybe it was just a phase, he told himself. Maybe once he found a better job, things would return to how they used to be. He hadn't always been jobless. A year ago, Daniel worked in logistics for a reputable firm, steady and reliable, with health insurance and a decent paycheck. Emma had been proud of him then, boasting to her friends about how responsible her husband was. But then, the downsizing happened. Daniel was let go along with a dozen others, and suddenly their savings evaporated into rent and diapers. The job market was merciless. Rejections piled up, and while Daniel searched for work and juggled childcare, Emma seemed to unravel. That evening, she stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her suitcase open on the bed like a gaping mouth ready to swallow her past. The babies had just fallen asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling beneath their matching pink blankets. Daniel watched her from the hallway, confusion knitting his brow. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked, his voice uncertain but calm. Emma didn't look up. She folded a blouse crisply and dropped it into the suitcase. Then a pair of jeans, a scarf. Her movements were swift, decisive. "I'm leaving," she said flatly. Daniel took a step forward. "Leaving for how long?" "For good." The words hit him like a slap. He stared at her, blinking. "What are you talking about? You can't just leave." She looked at him then, her face expressionless. "I'm tired, Daniel. I didn't sign up for this kind of life. I didn't marry you to live like this, counting coins, rationing formula, living in a box." Daniel's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The weight of her statement hung in the air, heavy and choking. "The girls. Emma, they need you. We need you. We'll figure it out. Please don't do this." She scoffed, zipping her bag shut. "They're not my concern anymore." "You don't mean that." "I do," she said coldly, brushing past him. "I'm done. Don't call me. Don't come after me. Do whatever you want with them." Daniel's voice cracked. "Please, stay for them if not for me." Emma turned, her eyes blazing. "No. Since you can't give me the life I want, I'm out. And honestly, I don't care if they live or die." And then she was gone. The door slammed behind her with finality. Daniel stood there, the silence around him deafening. His legs gave out beneath him and he sank to the floor, his back pressed against the wall. He stared at the closed door, hoping, somehow, that it would open again, that she would come back, laughing, saying it was a joke. But it remained shut. The girls stirred in their sleep, as if sensing something had changed. One of them let out a small cry, followed by the other. Their soft wails built into frantic sobbing. Daniel pulled himself up, dragged his feet to their room and picked them both up, holding them close. Their tiny faces were scrunched in distress, and he gently rocked them, whispering through the lump in his throat. He didn't know how long he stood there, swaying in the dark, his body aching, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. The girls gradually quieted, their hiccuping sobs turning into tired sniffles, then into slumber. He placed them gently back into their crib, tucking them in with trembling hands. He returned to the living room and sat down on the floor. The apartment felt colder, emptier, more fragile than ever. He looked around at the worn furniture, the chipped paint, the cracked lamp base. This was all he had. And now, even Emma was gone. But as he sat there, something began to stir in his chest. Not rage, not bitterness, but a fierce, quiet determination. He looked towards the crib where his daughter slept, unaware of the world's cruelty. He whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, "You still have me." The next few days passed in a blur. He tried to call Emma once. The call went straight to voicemail. He didn't try again. Instead, he threw himself into care routines. Feedings, diaper changes, baths, laundry, bottles, rockin', more diapers. Sleep came in fragments. Meals were skipped and his body ached from carrying 2 infants all day. The fridge began to empty. The money in the old cookie jar on top of the fridge dwindled to coins. The bills on the table formed an untouchable stack. Daniel had no choice. He needed work. Any work. On the morning of the 5th day after Emma left, Daniel woke to the sound of both girls crying. He had no formula left, no diapers, and nothing in the fridge except for a slice of bread. His hands trembled as he held them. Hunger scratched at his own belly, but he focused on them. Always them. He dressed quickly, strapping the girls into a double harness he'd rigged together from 2 baby carriers. One rested against his chest, the other against his back. With every step, he whispered prayers under his breath. He walked to the marketplace at the edge of the neighborhood. It bustled with activity. People selling, shouting, moving goods. Daniel approached a stall and asked the vendor, a broad-shouldered man with a rough beard, if he needed help. The man shrugged and handed him a wheelbarrow. Daniel began pushing heavy sacks of rice, crates of plantains, and boxes of bottled water. The sun beat down relentlessly. Sweat drenched his shirt, but he didn't stop. He worked in silence, determined to keep moving. Some people gave him strange looks, black man with babies, sweating, toiling like a mule. Others murmured words of pity or curiosity. A few kind-hearted individuals pressed small bills or coins into his hand. "For the girls," they said. He thanked them with a nod, too tired to speak. One old woman stopped him, her eyes filled with sorrow and admiration, and handed him a folded 500 naira note. "God bless you, child," she whispered. "You're doing a good job." Daniel bowed slightly. That night, after hours of back-breaking work, he had enough money to buy powdered milk and a few baby essentials. He stopped by a pharmacy, explained his situation, and the pharmacist, an elderly man with kind eyes, helped him make the best use of his modest funds. Back home, as he prepared bottles of warm milk, he glanced over at his daughters, now fast asleep. Their tiny chests rose and fell peacefully. For a moment, the exhaustion faded. He kissed each of them on the forehead. "I may not have much," he said quietly, "but I'll give you everything I have." That night, Daniel lay on the floor beside their crib, the blankets barely covering his legs, his eyes heavy, but in his heart a new fire had begun to burn. Emma was gone, but his daughters were here, and he would fight for them day after day, no matter how long, no matter how hard. Tomorrow, he would wake up and do it all over again, because he was a father, and he refused to fail. The days that followed Emma's departure bled into one another like brushstrokes on a gray canvas. Daniel no longer counted them. He measured time not in hours or calendar squares, but in feedings, diaper changes, and the exhausted rhythm of his daughter's cries. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with hunger. Nights passed not in sleep, but in constant movement between one twin's whimper and the other's restless sob. His apartment, once modest but manageable with 2 incomes, became a battlefield of survival. The smell of baby formula clung to the air, mingling with the scent of unwashed clothes and overused cleaning supplies. The bassinet by the window creaked under the girl's shifting weight, and Daniel had begun to memorize which floorboards groaned under his feet so he could tiptoe without waking them. His body ached constantly. Shoulders strained from carrying the twins, legs sore from hours of walking, hands cracked from exposure to sun, soap, and cement. His skin, once warm brown, now looked sallow under the poor Latin. Yet he never paused, never let himself sink beneath the weight. Each morning, before the market fully stirred, Daniel rose from the floor, his makeshift bed beside the crib, and began the day with ritualistic discipline. He bathed the girls using warm water heated in a dented kettle, cleaned their bottles, mixed formula in precise measurements, and folded the same 3 sets of baby clothes they rotated between. With no child care, no relatives nearby, and no neighbor able to watch over the twins for long, Daniel fashioned a way to carry them with him as he worked. An old bedsheet became an improvised sling when the second baby carrier tore. He practiced balancing them, one against his chest, the other on his back, until he could move almost freely. At the market, he became a familiar sight. The lean man with sharp eyes, dark circles under them, pushing a wheelbarrow with 2 babies strapped to his frame. Some vendors respected him, others tolerated him, and a few scoffed behind his back. Children stared at him with curiosity, and women with pity or admiration, depending on the moment. He took every job offered, carrying sacks of rice, crates of tomatoes, cement blocks. Once, a woman asked him to deliver a 25-liter drum of palm oil 4 blocks uphill. He accepted without complaint, though his knees nearly buckled halfway. The twins cried often, startled by noise, heat, or sheer discomfort, but Daniel had developed a rhythm, humming lullabies through clenched teeth, bouncing slightly with each step to soothe them. Money was tight. Some days he earned enough to buy formula, diapers, and a bit of bread for himself. Other days he had to choose, diapers or milk, light bulb or soap. He always chose the girls. He rationed his own food, skipping meals, drinking warm tap water to fill the hunger. On good days, he treated himself to a boiled egg from a roadside vendor. When rain came, it brought misery. The market turned to mud, stalls shuttered, and work vanished. Daniel would stand beneath an awning, shielding the babies from the downpour with his jacket, praying for even a single task that would buy them one more day. More than once, he returned home drenched, the babies shivering, his lips purple from cold. Yet through it all, he kept going. His body endured because his heart refused to break. He told himself each night as he stared at the ceiling from the floor, "Tomorrow is another day. They need me." In the quiet moments between tasks, when the twins napped on his chest or back, Daniel found comfort in watching them breathe. Their innocence calmed him. Their tiny fingers grasping his shirt felt like anchors holding him steady in a sea of exhaustion. They smiled now, more often, made soft gurgling sounds that felt like conversation. Sometimes they both looked up at him at once, and in those fleeting seconds, everything else disappeared. The pain, the poverty, the weight of abandonment. There was only them. One evening, after a particularly grueling day where he'd hauled cement for hours under the sun, Daniel returned to the apartment to find a notice tucked under his door. Overdue rent. 2 weeks, final warning. He sat down, cradling both girls in his arms, his chest rising and falling heavily. The landlord had already given him grace last month. There would be no second chance. The thought of being homeless with 2 infants turned his stomach. He opened the cookie jar where he kept his earnings. Coins. A few crumpled bills. Not enough. That night, he stayed awake, rocking the girls as they slept. He whispered prayers into the silence, not just for money, but for strength, for guidance, for a miracle. He thought of his parents, long gone, of Emma, whose face he no longer let himself picture, of every decision he'd made that led to this moment. Then he thought of tomorrow. Always tomorrow. The next morning, he rose before dawn, strapped the girls to his body, and left the apartment. His limbs were stiff, but his spirit unbroken. In desperation, he approached a construction site further across town, one that he'd avoided before due to its reputation for treating workers harshly. He asked the foreman for a job. The man glanced at the babies, then at Daniel's thin frame, and sneered. "This isn't charity. You think you can mix cement while carrying children?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I'll do anything." The man shook his head and walked away. Undeterred, Daniel headed to the loading dock behind a grocery warehouse. There, he was given 2 hours of unpaid probation to prove himself. He worked like a machine, lifting boxes, stacking crates, enduring shouts. At the end of the shift, the supervisor handed him a modest sum and said he could return the next day. It wasn't much, but it was something. That week, Daniel worked 4 jobs in rotation: market laborer, night cleaner at a fast food joint, temporary loader, and early morning street sweeper. He slept no more than 2 hours at a time. When he wasn't working, he was caring for the girls. Their growth was slow but steady. They started giggling when tickled, reached for his fingers, clung to his shirt like it was a lifeline. One afternoon, as he returned from the market, a familiar voice called his name. It was Mrs. Grace, the elderly neighbor who had occasionally offered warm meals in the past. "I've been watching you," she said gently. "Let me help." Daniel blinked. "How?" "Let me take the girls during the day, just while you work. They're too small to be in the heat." Daniel hesitated. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, but he saw the sincerity in her eyes. The next morning, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, he placed the girls in Mrs. Grace's arms. It felt like surrendering pieces of his soul. But when he returned in the evening, he found them clean, well-fed, and giggling as Mrs. Grace sang to them. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed with gratitude. From then on, the routine shifted slightly. Daniel still worked tirelessly, but he now did so with a lighter burden on his back, knowing the girls were in safe hands during the day. He used that energy to take on more hours, more jobs, more responsibility. At night, he continued to be the one who rocked them to sleep, who held them close when they cried, who whispered stories into the darkness. Through poverty, exhaustion, and loneliness, Daniel forged something greater than survival. He built a sanctuary for his daughters, not with bricks, but with love. Every spoonful of formula, every washed cloth diaper, every lullaby hummed through chapped lips was a promise. A promise that no matter how hard life pushed, he would never let go. As the chapter of hardship deepened, so too did the bond between father and daughters. They would not remember these years consciously, but the warmth in his arms, the steadiness of his presence, would shape them. And though Daniel did not yet know it, the seeds of his sacrifice had already begun to blossom, quietly, faithfully, into a future brighter than he could imagine. The years passed like pages in a worn-out book, faded by time but made stronger with every turn. Daniel could barely recall the day he first cradled both girls in his arms and whispered his promise to never leave. That memory now existed more like a feeling than an image, a quiet strength that had grown inside him through seasons of pain and perseverance. His daughters, once fragile bundles of warmth and milk-scented breath, had blossomed into bright, vibrant little girls with big eyes and even bigger dreams. Leah and Nora, now 6 years old, were the center of Daniel's world. Each day began with their soft footsteps padding through the small apartment and ended with their laughter echoing off the walls. They filled the modest space with joy, chasing each other around mismatched furniture, creating castles out of pillows and magic out of paper scraps. Though their toys were few and their clothes second-hand, their imaginations had no bounds, and Daniel, always watching, always listening, felt rich in ways no bank account could measure. Mornings were a whirlwind of activity. Daniel would rise before dawn, prepare oatmeal with a dash of cinnamon, a luxury he allowed when he could afford it, help the girls dress, braid their hair, and walk them to the nearby school before heading to work. The sight of them in their oversized backpacks, holding hands and skipping down the road, never failed to make him smile. They waved to neighbors, greeted shopkeepers, and recited rhymes they had made up just for their morning walk. Their school was modest, a low brick building with peeling paint and windows that rarely opened fully, but it was filled with dedicated teachers who noticed the spark in the twins almost immediately. Leah, the older by 8 minutes, loved to read, and could often be found with her nose buried in a book, even during recess. Nora, more expressive and artistic, spent her free time drawing pictures of her father, or making up elaborate stories where Daniel was the brave king who saved the world with kindness. The teachers were charmed by their bond, by the way they spoke of their father with reverence and pride. During parent meetings, Daniel would sit at the back of the room, quiet and humble, listening as the instructors praised his daughter's intelligence and compassion. He never spoke much, but his eyes would fill with quiet joy, and he would nod as if memorizing every word. What the teachers didn't see, what no one really saw, was the labor that lay beneath those smiles. Daniel still worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. He cleaned office buildings at night, loaded produce at the market in the morning, and delivered groceries on weekends. His feet ached constantly, his back throbbed, and the calluses on his hands were thick as bark. Yet, he never complained. Not when Leah rushed to show him her perfect test scores, or when Nora presented a stick figure drawing of Daddy the superhero with a red cape and glowing smile. Those moments erased the fatigue, made every drop of sweat worth it. Their tiny apartment was always tidy, if not perfectly decorated. Nora's drawings were taped to the walls beside Leah's school certificates. On the fridge hung a crooked magnet board with daily affirmations Leah had started writing. Daddy is strong. We are safe. Today will be good. Daniel had once found one that read, We will make him proud. He didn't say anything then, but that night, as the girls slept, he kissed them both and whispered, You already have. It was during the school's annual talent showcase that their creativity first drew public attention. The theme that year was Heroes Around Us, and while many children chose celebrities or cartoon characters, Leah and Nora stood on the small wooden stage with paper crowns on their heads and performed a short skit about a man who worked all day and all night just to keep his daughters happy. They ended with a song they had written together, a gentle melody about strength and love. As they sang, Daniel sat in the crowd, his heart pounding. Parents turned to glance at him, many with tears in their eyes. When the performance ended, the auditorium erupted in applause. The girls beamed, bowing proudly. Daniel stood, applauding with the rest, but his hands trembled. He had never felt more seen. That night, they returned home to a small feast. Macaroni and cheese with diced hot dogs, a rare treat. Daniel let them stay up late, dancing to old songs on the radio. The three of them moved around the living room, laughing, spinning, collapsing into each other's arms in fits of giggles. It was a memory that would live in all their hearts forever. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The girls came home with excited expressions, talking over each other about a school fundraiser. There would be a weekend fair where students could sell handmade items. Leah had an idea. They could make bracelets and necklaces. Nora agreed, suggesting they decorate each piece with words of encouragement like, Be brave and love more. Daniel was skeptical. You've never made jewelry before, he said gently, but the girls were undeterred. Using scraps of yarn, old buttons, beads from a neighbor, and even pasta dyed with food coloring, the girls began crafting. They worked at the kitchen table each evening, their tongues poking out in concentration. Daniel sitting nearby with a mug of tea, watching them with a mix of amusement and awe. He helped when he could, threading difficult knots or trimming loose ends. In less than a week, they had over 50 bracelets, each tagged with a hand-drawn price tag and a note. Made with love by Leah and Nora. The day of the fair arrived, warm and bright. They set up their booth on a folding table with a tablecloth Daniel had borrowed from a friend. A sign hung overhead, For Dad, bracelets, love you can wear. It was Nora's idea, and it caught attention immediately. People stopped, asked questions, bought bracelets not only for the colors, but for the story. The girls told everyone about their dad, about how he worked so hard, and how they wanted to help him. By the end of the day, their box was nearly empty, and their coin jar was full. The principal of the school, who had been quietly observing, approached Daniel as the fair wrapped up. "You've raised two remarkable girls," she said, "and I think they've started something special." That evening, back at home, the three of them counted coins and bills on the kitchen table. They had made enough to buy school supplies, new shoes, and still have some left over. Daniel watched them, their faces glowing with pride, and he felt a strange stirring inside him, something like hope. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a wall. It looked like a window. The success at the fair sparked a new fire in the girls. They wanted to keep making bracelets, and they wanted to share them with more people. A neighbor's teenage son, Marcus, who had some knowledge of social media, offered to help them set up an Instagram account. He took pictures of the bracelets, of the girls working, and one of Daniel, arms around both of them with the caption, "For Dad, A story of love, one bead at a time. The post gained traction. People shared it, comments poured in, some asking where to buy, others simply offering words of encouragement. Strangers donated money. A woman from across the country ordered a dozen bracelets for her daughter's birthday party. Someone else asked if they could ship internationally. The girls were ecstatic. They spent weekends making bracelets, packaging them with care, and Daniel helped label envelopes. He even opened a small bank account in their names, something he had always wanted to do, but never had the means. One night, as they sat under the dim kitchen light, Nora looked up from a bracelet she was threading and said, "Daddy, do you think we can have our own store one day?" Daniel chuckled, brushing her cheek. "Why not?" Leah added. "We'll call it For Dad. And it'll have your picture right at the front." Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. "I don't need a picture in a store." "Yes, you do," they said in unison. As he watched them return to their work, their small fingers moving with care and purpose, Daniel realized something extraordinary had happened. They were no longer just surviving. They were dreaming. And with those dreams, the roots of something greater began to grow. Not just a business, not just a future, but a legacy born from love, hardship, and an unbreakable bond between a father and his daughters. The success of their little handmade bracelets did more than just bring in some money. It awakened something inside the twins that no one, not even Daniel, could have fully predicted. What began as an after-school project to help their father became the spark for a movement. Leah and Nora, now barely 11, carried themselves with a confidence rooted not in arrogance but in purpose. Their small hands created not just jewelry, but meaning. Their growing online presence caught the attention of people far beyond their neighborhood, and the Instagram page managed by Marcus evolved into a blooming digital storefront. Orders started coming in regularly, first from nearby towns, then from different states. Each bracelet was lovingly crafted, each package carefully wrapped in reused tissue paper, each note still handwritten and signed by the girls. Daniel watched in awe as their living room transformed. The sofa and chairs were pushed aside to make space for folding tables covered with strings, beads, stickers, and packing materials. The apartment, though cramped and chaotic, hummed with life and creation. His daughters were no longer just little girls with dreams. They were creators, entrepreneurs in the making. Customers from across the country commented on their posts, praising their courage, applauding their story, and asking how they could help. Donations trickled in, $5 here, $10 there, but the volume slowly increased. Some sent beads, packaging materials, or ribbons with notes, "For the girls who inspire us." A woman from Texas sent a sewing machine and a handwritten letter. Another family from Ohio offered to mentor them in online sales. Daniel remained humble throughout. When strangers referred to him as a hero father in comments or emails, he smiled quietly, sometimes wiping his eyes before responding. He never thought of himself that way. He was just a father who hadn't walked away. He had stayed, as any father should. The growth of their brand outpaced their space. It was Leah who first brought it up one night, her voice hesitant. "Daddy," she said, stirring her spoon through a bowl of rice and beans, "what if we opened a shop?" Daniel blinked. "A shop?" "Just a little one," Nora added, "where people can come and see our things in person. And maybe we can make more. Necklaces, keychains, bookmarks, even notebooks with messages." Daniel looked at them both, their eager eyes shining in the dim glow of the kitchen light. His first instinct was worry. Rent for a store, utilities, inventory, What if it failed? But he didn't say that. Instead, he asked, "Do you think people would come?" "Yes," they replied together without hesitation. It took them 3 weeks to find a space they could afford. It wasn't much, just a narrow storefront wedged between a laundromat and a bakery, with peeling paint and dusty windows, but it was theirs. The landlord, a middle-aged man with a soft spot for children, gave them a steep discount after hearing their story. Daniel dipped into every penny of his savings. The girls added what they'd earned, and Marcus helped set up a simple donation drive on their social media to raise the last bit. Within 48 hours, they had enough. They painted the walls themselves, Daniel on a ladder, the girls rolling brushes across the lower half. They cleaned the floors, washed the windows, and installed a homemade counter built by a retired carpenter Daniel once helped at the market. Friends donated shelves and display stands. Marcus designed a hand-painted sign for the front window. "For Dad, a store of love." On opening day, the girls wore matching shirts with the brand's name in bold letters. Daniel stood behind them, dressed in his cleanest shirt, his hands wringing together in nervous pride. They opened the doors with no fanfare, expecting only a few visitors. But within the first hour, customers began to arrive. Some were neighbors, others were strangers who had followed their story online and driven miles to support them. One couple said they had come from another city just to meet the girls in person. The store was a hit. Customers loved not just the products, but the atmosphere. It was warm, humble, filled with handwritten notes and simple kindness. Each bracelet had a story. Each item carried a message. The girls made time to talk to every visitor, offering smiles and thank yous with sincerity far beyond their years. Daniel handled inventory, cleaned, restocked, and occasionally sat at the front when the girls were in school. He often received compliments and warm handshakes, though he remained modest, always redirecting praise to his daughters. One day, a well-dressed woman entered the store quietly, browsed for a long time, then asked to speak with the girls. She introduced herself as a representative from a regional news network. She wanted to feature their story. Daniel hesitated, wary of exposure and cameras, but the girls were thrilled. After much discussion, he agreed. The interview aired 2 weeks later. It featured footage of the girls crafting jewelry, clips from their school performance, and a heartfelt segment where Daniel spoke briefly about raising them alone. He said, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just stayed, and I loved them with everything I had." The story went viral. Overnight, their follower count skyrocketed. Major outlets reached out. Orders exploded. A crowdfunding campaign Marcus helped create surpassed its goal in less than a day. Companies offered partnerships. One online retail platform offered to sponsor their shipping costs for a year. Another offered to feature them on the front page of their site. It was overwhelming. Daniel insisted on keeping things small, local, and personal. He didn't want to lose the soul of what they'd built, but he also understood that this growth could mean security for the girls' future. After many conversations, they expanded slowly and carefully. They hired 2 local assistants trained by Leah and Nora and moved to a slightly bigger space on the same block. All of this might have made some children arrogant, but the twins remained grounded. They remembered every hard night, every skipped meal, every step their father had taken carrying them through the streets. And Daniel made sure they never forgot their roots. One evening, as they sat on the back porch of their small but now tidy home, Daniel watched the girls counting receipts and tracking orders on a tablet. He smiled to himself, proud but still uneasy. He had spent so many years surviving that comfort felt unfamiliar. He didn't know how to relax, but his daughters noticed. "Daddy," Nora said, setting down her pencil, "you don't have to work so much anymore." Leah nodded. "We're okay now. You can rest." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't know how." "You can learn," Nora said, climbing into his lap. They sat in silence, the air filled with the distant hum of city life, the smell of evening cooking from neighbors' windows, and the golden hue of a sunset that promised peace. Daniel felt something shift inside, a gentle easing of the tightness he had carried for so long. He was learning, slowly, to breathe again. Later that month, the girls approached him with another idea. They wanted to give back. Not just in the form of donations or good customer service, but something real, something lasting. They wanted to start a project that would help other single parents, especially fathers, who were struggling as Daniel once had. They called it the Daniel Project. The aim was simple: to provide starter kits for parents in need. Each kit would include essentials: diapers, formula, hygiene supplies, and handwritten letters of encouragement. They partnered with a local shelter, then with a community center. Volunteers signed up to help. Schools organized donation drives. Their small store had become a movement. Daniel watched all of it unfold with quiet awe. He remained in the background, always helping, always present, but never seeking attention. To him, the real victory wasn't the success or the money. It was the strength and compassion his daughters carried into the world. He had given them love, and they had turned it into something greater than he ever imagined. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from a university. Both girls had applied early for a junior entrepreneur program hosted during the summer. They had been accepted, with scholarships. Daniel read the letters aloud, his voice trembling. The girls screamed, jumped, hugged each other, and then hugged him. They were growing, reaching, building futures far beyond the limits he had once feared. But through it all, they remained his girls, kind, loyal, and full of fire. And as they celebrated with a homemade cake and warm milk, Daniel sat back, watching them with a full heart. He had once walked the streets with them strapped to his body, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Now they stood before him as young women changing the world. The rise of 4Dad was not just a business. It was a legacy, built on sacrifice, held together by love, and powered by the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughters. The warmth of spring had settled gently over the city, and with it came the sweet breath of jasmine from the neighborhood gardens. Business at the 4Dad store had never been better. It had grown into more than just a boutique. It was a sanctuary, a place where strangers came to feel seen, to feel something that had become increasingly rare in the world: honesty. Daniel arrived each morning just after sunrise, sweeping the front walk and opening the shutters. Leah and Nora handled the inventory and design, while 2 part-time assistants managed the till and customers. The once humble apartment above the store had been renovated into a brighter, cleaner home with fresh paint, new curtains, and furniture that didn't wobble or squeak. For the first time in years, Daniel had his own bed and a room with a door. He still rose early, still prepared breakfast for his daughters, but life now moved with steadiness, not urgency. One humid afternoon, with storm clouds brooding in the distance, a woman entered the store quietly. She wore worn sneakers, a faded dress, and carried a small satchel over her shoulder. Her eyes, ringed with exhaustion, darted around the store like a child looking for something lost. She walked past the display tables slowly, tracing her fingers along the wooden edge, absorbing the wall of photos and notes left by grateful customers. At the counter, one of the assistants smiled and asked how she could help. The woman hesitated before speaking. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice roughened by years of disuse or disappointment. "I can clean, wash dishes, sweep floors, anything." The assistant nodded and asked her to wait, then stepped into the back office to call Leah and Nora, who were sorting supplies for an upcoming community event. Within minutes, the sisters emerged and greeted the woman with warmth and professionalism that had become second nature. Nora led her to a small table and offered her water. Leah asked polite, thoughtful questions about her skills and experience. The woman responded nervously, occasionally avoiding eye contact. There was something familiar about her, though neither of the girls could place it. Perhaps it was her cheekbones, or the way she wrung her hands when nervous, something that hovered just out of reach in their memories. Though there were no open positions, Leah offered her a chance to wash dishes during busy shifts. The woman's shoulders sagged with relief. She accepted gratefully, tears threatening to rise, but she blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered. They didn't know her name was Emma, not yet. The days that followed moved swiftly. Emma, now reduced to silence and labor, arrived early and left late. She worked diligently, scrubbing counters and polishing glass until her fingers cracked. She never complained, never asked questions. She didn't speak of her past, nor did she pry into anyone else's. She simply existed, a quiet ghost in the background of the bright and bustling store. Daniel didn't notice her at first. He rarely went into the back where she worked, and when he did, she quickly turned away or disappeared behind a stack of supplies. But one day, weeks after she had started, he walked into the back room looking for a missing box of shipping labels. She stood there alone, wiping down a table. Her back was turned, but when she turned to face him, their eyes locked. Daniel froze. The air between them thickened with recognition and 100 unsaid words. Emma's mouth opened, but no sound came. She dropped the rag in her hand. Daniel stepped back slowly, as if unsure whether the vision before him was real or some cruel trick of memory. He didn't speak, didn't accuse. He turned and walked out. Later that night, he sat his daughters down in the kitchen where they had eaten beans and rice, where they had once counted bracelet money by candlelight, where their laughter had healed the hollow ache she had left behind. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "You have a new dishwasher. You've been kind to her. You offered her work when she needed it." He paused, the silence stretching like a bridge over deep water. "That woman is your mother." The air in the room stilled. The hum of the refrigerator became deafening. Nora's lips parted in disbelief. Leah stared at the table, her fingers curling tightly around her glass. "But how?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded slowly. "I burned every photo after she left. I didn't want the memories. I didn't want you growing up wondering why she chose to leave. So, you've never seen her face." They sat in silence. Leah rose first. Without a word, she walked down the stairs and into the store, then through the back door. Emma was there, as always, stacking cleaned utensils. She turned when she saw Leah. Her lips trembled. I'm so sorry." Leah didn't hesitate. She reached for the register, grabbed a stack of bills, and thrust them into Emma's hand. "Take this. It's more than what you've worked for. Leave, now." Emma's eyes flooded, but she didn't move. "I don't know you," Leah said, her voice shaking with restrained fury. "You are not my mother. My mother is Mama Grace, the woman who held me when I cried, the woman who fed me when we were hungry, the woman who stayed." Emma reached out with trembling fingers, but Leah stepped back. "Go!" Nora appeared behind her sister, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She placed a gentle hand on Leah's shoulder. "Please, don't send her away. Not like this." Leah's expression wavered. Her lips trembled. Her fury cracked, revealing a grief long buried. "She left us," she whispered. "She left us to suffer, to die. She walked away from her own babies." Her sobs burst forth, raw and unrelenting. Nora wrapped her arms around her sister, holding her as she wept. Emma stood in the doorway, unable to move, her face pale and hollow. "I'm sorry," Emma said again. "I was young, selfish. I thought I was choosing freedom, but I chose emptiness, and I've paid for it every day since." That night, after the store closed, Daniel sat with his daughters once more. They spoke in hushed tones, the pain still fresh, the wounds reopened. But by morning, the decision had been made. Emma would stay, for now, not as family, but as someone seeking redemption. The girls couldn't forget, but they could offer her the dignity of a second chance. They promoted her to a matron role. She now oversaw store operations and staff coordination. At first, she seemed changed. She was soft-spoken, respectful, diligent. Customers complimented her grace. Employees appreciated her experience. Daniel remained distant but courteous. The girls monitored her progress, silently hopeful, cautiously watchful. But slowly, things began to shift. Emma's voice regained its edge. Her instructions grew sharp. She snapped at new hires for minor errors. She criticized display setups with veiled sarcasm. The warmth in the store began to cool. Staff avoided her. Customers lingered less. The twins noticed the tension, but weren't sure where it came from until an assistant came to them in tears after being called incompetent by Emma in front of customers. They confronted her one evening after closing. "You're hurting the people who work here," Leah said, her voice calm but firm. Emma crossed her arms. "I'm your mother. You don't tell me what to do." Nora flinched. "You don't get to use that word like a weapon." Emma's expression darkened. "You praise that man like he's a saint. He just sits at home while you run yourselves into the ground, and all you give me is a paycheck." Daniel, who had been listening nearby, walked away in silence. Leah's tone hardened. "If you ever speak about our father like that again, we will have a serious problem." Emma scoffed. "You're just managing me. You don't love me." "We don't know you," Leah replied, her voice quiet but cold. "You had love, and you gave it away." The next morning, the girls informed Emma that her services were no longer needed. She exploded, screamed, accused, cursed, but she left. They didn't leave her to fall. A week later, they opened a small fabric shop for her across the street. It was stocked, staffed, and ready. She could manage it or not. They wouldn't interfere. Daniel sat in the kitchen that night, staring into his tea. "I wanted to believe people change," he said softly. "I wanted to believe she came back for the right reasons." Nora placed her hand over his. "She didn't," Leah replied, "but we did the right thing." In the weeks that followed, the store returned to its former self. The staff smiled again. Customers lingered. Laughter returned. For Dad flourished. Daniel watched from the sidelines, proud as ever, knowing the hardest battles were not fought in poverty, but in forgiveness. And his daughters had faced both. The air inside the store was warmer again, not because of temperature, but because of something deeper. Ease. The quiet unease that had begun to permeate for Dad during Emma's final weeks was gone. The staff greeted each other with sincere smiles, and customers lingered longer by the handmade displays, chatting with the girls and complimenting the familiar scent of lavender that now drifted freely through the shop. Daniel could sense the change. He didn't need to be told. He had always been attuned to subtle shifts in mood, in tone, in silence, and the silence no longer carried tension. It breathed peace. The fabric store Emma now managed stood just across the street. From time to time, Daniel would glance toward its wide window and catch sight of her moving slowly among bolts of cloth, speaking to a customer, restocking thread. There was no shouting, no visible bitterness, but there was no joy either. She remained an island, distant, functional, contained. The girls rarely mentioned her. When they did, it was with restraint. There had been no apology that could reverse the pain, no explanation that could fill the years of absence. And though Daniel often wondered whether it had been right to open that store for her, he never spoke those thoughts aloud. In the store, expansion had resumed. The brief disruption had delayed projects and unsettled their momentum, but once Emma was gone, everything moved quickly. Orders poured in again. Their community events flourished. The Daniel Project, their outreach program to single fathers, received its first official grant, allowing them to build more comprehensive starter kits and partner with social workers in multiple districts. Leah and Nora, now 17, split their time between running the growing business and studying for their final year of school. Their discipline was astonishing. They worked late into the night, managing spreadsheets and planning marketing campaigns, then rose early to revise for exams. Sometimes Daniel found them both asleep at the kitchen table, heads resting on textbooks, fingers still curled around pens. He would cover them with a blanket and turn off the lights. His role had changed too. He no longer carried boxes or ran deliveries. The staff did that now. Instead, Daniel became the soul of the store, greeting guests, sharing stories, thanking donors, and comforting the occasional visitor who came through the doors more for the warmth than the wares. He was no longer just a father. He was a symbol. People came just to meet him, to take photos, to shake his hand. He remained humble, always redirecting credit to the girls. But he was proud, in the quiet way that only men who had lost everything and built again could be proud. One afternoon, a small group of school children visited the store on a field trip arranged by their teacher. Daniel guided them through the displays, explaining the history behind the brand, the meaning of each bracelet line, the impact of the Daniel Project. The children listened with wide eyes, asking curious questions. At the end of the visit, a little boy tugged on Daniel's sleeve and said, "When I grow up, I want to be a dad like you." Daniel blinked, overcome. He smiled, knelt down, and said simply, "Then you already know what matters most." That evening, back at home, the three of them sat down to dinner, something that had become increasingly rare. They often ate in shifts now between meetings and events, but tonight felt different. The table was set, the lights were dimmed, and the air was filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and freshly baked rolls. They had reason to celebrate. Leah had just received confirmation that their third store location, this time in a neighboring city, had been approved and would open within the month. Nora had finished drafting a proposal for their new mentorship initiative, aiming to pair successful entrepreneurs with teenagers from underserved areas. Everything was moving forward, faster than they dared to imagine. Yet, beneath the excitement, a quiet conversation waited. When the dishes were cleared and the tea was steeping, Leah set her cup down gently and looked at her father. "Daddy," she began, her voice steady but soft, "there's something we've been thinking about." Daniel looked between her and Nora, sensing the seriousness. "We've built this together," Nora said, "and we know how proud you are, but you're still alone," Leah finished. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Alone? Girls, I'm surrounded by people. By you." "We know," Leah said, "but we also know what it's like to have someone by your side. You've given everything for us, and we don't want you to grow old without someone who loves you." Daniel smiled, amused, and moved at once. "You two sound like little matchmakers." Nora leaned forward. "We've met someone. Her name is Ruth. She works in one of our locations, manages the cafe space. She's kind, wise, and she speaks highly of you." Daniel blinked. "You've spoken to her about me?" Leah nodded. "She knows your story. Everyone does. But she never treated it like a myth. She sees you, and we think you might like her." He leaned back, thoughtful. It had been years since Daniel had even considered the idea of companionship. The last time he'd opened his heart, it had cost him nearly everything. But the girls weren't pushing. They were offering. "Take your time," Nora added gently. "There's no pressure. But we just want you to know you don't have to stay alone." For the next 2 days, Daniel carried their words with him. He moved through the shop, through meetings and quiet moments, with their voices in the back of his mind. He recalled Ruth, calm, graceful, always attentive to customers and kind to staff. He remembered her offering him coffee once, and how her smile lingered after she turned away. He began to notice more. How she laughed with her colleagues, how she spoke to children, how she walked slowly, as though nothing rushed her, and yet never wasted time. On the 3rd day, he visited her location under the pretense of checking inventory. She greeted him with the same calm smile, her eyes full of intelligence and light. They talked. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic, but when he left, he felt lighter. A week later, they had dinner. It wasn't a date, not exactly, just 2 people talking over food, learning each other's rhythms. Ruth was a widow with 2 children of her own, teenagers, respectful and bright. She spoke openly, but never asked more than he was willing to give. And Daniel, for the first time in years, let someone into the quieter rooms of his heart. Months passed. The relationship unfolded like a gentle tide, no storms, no rush. Ruth met Leah and Nora. Her children visited the main store and helped volunteer at the Daniel Project. It felt natural, unforced, and slowly the idea that had once seemed unthinkable became something they all cherished. On the day Daniel proposed, it was in the garden behind the main store, under string lights and swaying leaves. The girls watched from the back steps, hands clasped, eyes shining. Ruth said yes with a smile that made Daniel feel as though he were waking from a long, cold winter. They decided to marry on the same day as Leah and Nora. The girls, now both engaged to kind and hard-working men they had met through their charity work, wanted the occasion to be a shared beginning. A wedding of love, of resilience, of family rebuilt. The church was filled with friends, with strangers who had followed their story, with children they had helped, and parents they had supported. Mama Grace stood at the front, regal and smiling as the honorary matron of the day. Daniel walked down the aisle between his daughters, his hands clasped with theirs, his steps slow and sure. They had built something extraordinary. Not just a business, not just a legacy, but a life filled with hope, forged from hardship carried by love. And now, as he stood with Ruth beneath the soft glow of stained glass, watching his daughters step forward with their husbands, Daniel knew the truth. He had not just survived. He had triumphed. And this day, this family, this joy, was the reward for never letting go. The months following the weddings unfolded like a quiet sunrise over a calm sea, steadily, gently, with a warmth that seemed to reach into every corner of Daniel's life. The photographs from that day still sat on the mantel in the living room above the boutique, framed in silver and arranged like sacred artifacts. Daniel and Ruth, standing side by side in matching cream and gold, their hands entwined, eyes filled with peace. Leah and Nora, radiant in their dresses, each beside the man they loved, their faces glowing not just with the joy of the moment, but with the hard-earned serenity of women who had walked through fire and come out whole. Life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel no longer rose before dawn to sweep the storefront or organize the shelves, though he often still did out of habit. He now had the luxury of choosing his mornings, some spent in the garden behind the shop, others with Ruth and her children, sharing coffee and soft laughter over breakfast. There were days he simply sat in the sun on the back porch, a worn book open in his hands, though he rarely turned the pages. More often than not, his thoughts drifted to the past, to the years of hunger and toil, to nights spent rocking crying infants, to the moment he thought he had lost everything and the slow, relentless climb back. He had always imagined that peace, if it ever came, would feel like stillness. But he found instead that it pulsed with life. Ruth brought with her not just companionship, but a kind of lightness he hadn't known he'd needed. Her presence was not demanding, but steady. Her laughter echoed softly in his days, and her wisdom tempered his worries when the girls faced difficult decisions in business or life. Her children, now like his own, had integrated into the family with the seamlessness of a puzzle finally completed. There were game nights, shared meals, and impromptu debates around the kitchen table about music, justice, or dreams. For Dad had become a name recognized far beyond their neighborhood. What had started as a table of bracelets now spanned 6 physical stores across 3 cities, with pop-up events, school programs, and a strong online presence managed by a growing team of dedicated staff. Leah and Nora, though still young, had emerged as confident leaders, balancing compassion with competence and bringing their personal values into every aspect of the brand. They had become speakers, mentors, and philanthropists, invited to panels, interviews, and conferences, yet they never allowed the attention to erode their roots. Every month, they visited Mama Grace. Her age had slowed her body, but her mind remained sharp as ever. She sat in her armchair by the window, wrapped in a shawl the girls had embroidered with the words, "Our First Mother," sipping tea with a regal air. Leah and Nora would sit at her feet, chatting like children again, updating her on projects and family news, often staying for hours. The girls never let a month go by without ensuring her bills were paid, her pantry stocked, and her comfort protected. She had once saved them with nothing more than a kind heart and 2 open arms. Now they returned that love with unwavering devotion. Daniel watched all this with quiet awe. His daughters were now women, but they had not hardened. Their hearts remained soft, their convictions strong. They had built not just a brand or a movement, but a community, a network of support for people who needed someone to believe in them. The Daniel Project had grown into its own entity, with a dedicated building downtown that offered free childcare for working fathers, legal aid, employment training, and emergency shelter services. A mural covered the exterior wall, depicting Daniel pushing a wheelbarrow with 2 small children strapped to him, beneath a banner that read, "He carried us so we could fly." At the unveiling, Daniel stood in front of a small crowd, Ruth by his side, the girls flanking him. A local reporter handed him a microphone. Daniel cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and took a long moment to look at the mural before turning to the crowd. "I never imagined," he began, "that the hardest years of my life would become the foundation for something so beautiful. I didn't set out to inspire anyone. I didn't have a plan. I only knew that I had 2 little girls who depended on me. I had no room for fear, no space for failure, just love. That was it. That was all I had." He paused, the wind tugging gently at his jacket. "But love," he continued, "can carry more than you think. It can outlast pain. It can outwork exhaustion. It can rebuild what you thought was lost. And sometimes it even comes back to you, multiplied." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room of the main house, the girls brought out a surprise. A slim, black leather book with golden letters embossed on the front. "For Dad, the story behind the brand." It was a full-color memoir, written and published without his knowledge, compiled from journals, photos, interviews, and their personal memories. Inside were chapters telling the story from their eyes. The hunger, the sacrifice, the quiet strength of a father who never once asked for praise but deserved all of it. Daniel turned the pages slowly, reading their words. One passage read, "He never gave us excuses. He gave us examples." Another, "When we were little, he was our shelter. Now we build with the tools he handed us." He closed the book gently, pressing it to his chest. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. In the months that followed, time moved softly. Ruth's shop thrived on its own, and the family began discussing a long-dreamed vacation. Something simple, a rented cabin in the mountains, a place to unplug, rest, and just be together. Daniel laughed at the idea of being off the grid, but he welcomed it. One quiet morning, as birds chirped in the trees outside, Daniel walked through the garden, now lush and fragrant. He carried a mug of coffee and paused by the bench beneath the jacaranda tree, where the petals fell like soft purple snow. He sat down, breathing deeply, letting the warmth of the rising sun touch his face. It was here that he often reflected, not just on what had been lost, but on what had been found. He thought of Emma sometimes, not with anger, but with understanding. He didn't know what her days looked like now, and he didn't need to. She had made her choices, and he had made his. He bore no hate, just clarity, and a firm grip on what mattered most. From the house, he heard laughter, Ruth calling for breakfast, the girls discussing a delivery schedule, one of the grandchildren clapping in excitement. A life, a full, deep, joyful life. Daniel smiled, leaned back, and let the warmth soak into his bones. He had built a legacy, not a wealth or recognition, but a love. The kind that never fades, never breaks, and never lets go. It had carried him through the darkest years and returned to him in the form of 2 extraordinary daughters who bore his spirit, his values, and his name. And now, finally, he rested. Not because he was tired, but because he had finished what he started. He had been their strength when the world offered none. He had stayed, and that had made all the difference. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch our next video to discover another powerful journey and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.